Hey folks, how you doing? Good evening. It's that time. It is 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. On what's the date today anyway? Is it the 9th? I don't want to make these videos for future viewers be something that is outdated. We are reading a book that will, I think, stay true to time for quite a while, but it's now the 9th of April, 2019 is when we're recording this, or at least broadcasting live and recording it. And this is for my book that was written, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. I wrote this book back in 2011, as many of you who've been here already know. And I was published in 2011. Was it 2012? It was published in 2012. February of 2012. And so we're now in the 7th year since it's been written. So that's what we've been doing. And what I like to do at the beginning here is just kill a few minutes to make sure, because we're a live stream, that more people who want to be here get here. And so let me say good evening to Casper. Good to see you, brother. And let's see, Mark is here. Good to see you as well. I hope you're on your porch smoking a cigar and tipping back some single malt Highland Scotch. Rocky Stucci is in the room, so shut up. The big cannoli to the Rocky Stucci. All right, who else we got? We got scrolling down. And by the way, Rocky Stucci's show is going to air not long after this program is done. And it's going to be a little longer tonight because we got a long-ass chapter. So we're going to hit it here quicker than not. June, nice to see you. And Francis, good to see you. And have I missed anybody that's initially here in the first couple of minutes? So far, so good. And so what we're going to do is jump into it pretty quickly because it's a damn long chapter. Probably the longest one in the book. We'll see how far we get. And what I do not want to do is run into Rocky's show, which starts at 11 p.m. Central Standard Time, which is about an hour and 58 minutes from now. Midnight, of course, out east. It's now 10 o'clock out east here. So I also have some very good news I want to share with you. Some intriguing news. I got a call this afternoon. Now, as I have mentioned before, I have mentioned that I have on the back burner wanting to write a follow-up to this book on the Nephilim because some of my views have changed and some things like that. And so I've been toying with that. And here, I'm going to pull this just a little closer because things are all out of whack. So I've been toying with that. And now that I was ready to submit a proposal on that, even though I'd talked to my publisher. I was going to submit a proposal, and I get a call today from my publisher at New Page Books, Michael Pye. And the way it still works is while Red Wheel Weiser has bought them out, they are still now an imprint, what they call an imprint of Red Wheel Weiser. So they're still publishing under the name, but they are owned by Red Wheel Weiser. And Michael said to me, you know, that proposal for the follow-up to the Nephilim that you want to do and that we'd like to have you to do, he says, how about this? We would like to have you write a book on the Book of Enoch. And he said, would you be willing to do that as the follow-up to the Nephilim? And I said, hey, perfect. It's a perfect segue. It's also a perfect topic and one that I could sink my teeth into. So, oh yeah, hey, by the way, Rocky Stucci, this is for you. Hey, there you are, brother. Hard to see him. Let me shift the light. There you go. It's Captain Kirk. Captain Kirk in all his glory. He's got his communicator and his phaser. That's for you, Rocky. He's right back here. He's keeping watch. So, so that's the good news tonight. My publisher has asked me to write a book on the Book of Enoch. And so I can see a lot of great places. And if you've been with us the other nights, you'll know how intriguing the Book of Enoch is. And yeah, y'all like my Captain Kirk? You should wait to see until I get all the action figures up. And I've got some action figures you guys have got to see. One of these times I'll get up here and I'll show them to y'all. But I've got, it was a privately made set, 12-inch action figures of Lewis and Clark from the Lewis and Clark expedition, the historical mission. And it opens up in a big box, and the flap comes open, and each piece has like 100 different pieces of accoutrements that are, you know, swords and handkerchiefs and diaries and pens and compasses and all of that stuff. And it's an amazing set. And I also have Sacagawea. And because she was a Native American woman, she didn't seem to have the gear they had. So she's got a lot less gear, but she's got a baby. So I think that compensates. So there you go. And so now, without too much further delay, I'd like us to dig into this chapter. This is kind of the meaty chapter of the book. Yum. All right, here we go. This chapter is entitled The Nephilim. And chapter 8 of the book. So get your iron shorts on, your thinking caps beneath your tinfoil helmets, and let's roll. Starts off with this quote from Shakespeare. "What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like God." Now we're on it. The brass tacks of this entire book, the Nephilim themselves. We've taken many words to get to this chapter, and we've examined many different foundations and rabbit-trailing facets that have led us to this point, albeit not exhaustively. As I mentioned in the introduction, I am currently not the end-all and be-all on the topic of the Nephilim, the Watchers, their religious and spiritual aspects and ramifications, nor the alternative alien angle we have touched on, in so cursory a fashion. I am, however, another in a long, ever-lengthening line of interested, invested researchers to study, examine, and come to what somewhat scholarly conclusions. I have melded the scholarship done by so many others before me, broached the pop culture, the fringe, the metaphysical science, and presented ideas and hypotheses drawn from the historical, cultural, archaeological, and anthropological data that is so scattered and diverse on this topic. What is clear is that something phenomenal happened in our ancient past and is still happening today that ought not be relegated simply to the realm of the supernatural or the paranormal only because it deals with subject matter that falls outside the lines etched in the sand by the scientific and religious communities. I have found it extremely daunting, yet strangely interesting, that the two differing camps in nearly any phenomena, theory, or topic out there seem to unwittingly come together in their opposing dissensions and dogmatic stances when it comes to the Nephilim and all the surrounding information. As I've mentioned in my many public lectures many times, a study of the Nephilim is no simple task, for it encompasses a plethora of hugely diverse information that delves into so many other aspects of human existence. The story of the Nephilim is an enormous topic, for it goes to the roots of religion, faith, science, and the existence of humanity as we know it or don't know it today. On one hand, the Nephilim speak to the foundations of human development, the encoding of DNA, and ancient anthropological development of human civilization. On the other hand, the Nephilim represent a caste of mutated, corrupt progeny, bequeathed by the Watchers, part of the military structured host, of created beings who are subservient to the holy God of the Jews and the Christians. And what you come down to is nothing short of a religious scientific quandary to decide which end of the spectrum you choose to believe regarding these characters, who are so much the product of a mythological history. And yes, it is about belief, because even the facts used to establish a more or less solid case for the existence of these beings does not follow the dictates of historical, scientific, and anthropological rules. Their source point lies within religious texts and the faith writings that comprise scriptures from all different spiritual aspects. And as you've already experienced in the earlier pages of this book, I've used as my starting point the book of Genesis in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. After all, the word Nephilim itself is sourced from those pages. You are reading this book, or listening, as such as the case may be, because these things are of interest to you. You either possess a belief that they exist and you want to know more about it, or you have a curiosity about these sorts of mysteries that leads you to find out what others have to say about them, or you're simply looking on these pages to point out what I have missed or where my theologies are disingenuous or lacking in scholarship. Whatever the case may be for you, when it comes to the Nephilim and all the surrounding massive information used to build up a case, you have to, in your own minds, come to one of two conclusions. Either the Nephilim are figments of spiritually based imaginations, or they are actually beings who existed, whether having non-supernatural explanations or spiritual ones. This reminds me of a true story I heard in my youth, as told by the head of Baptist Mid-Missions. A group of missionaries set up a bush hospital to help now some of you have heard this story before. I've used it before by way of illustration of other things. A group of missionaries set up a bush hospital to help the population of several small villages in West Africa. As their medical outpost became established, the missionaries had to work very diplomatically with the tribal witch doctor, who saw the influence of modern medicine as a threat to his craft and sway over the locals. There had been an outbreak of the doctor had insisted it was demonic in nature. By invite, the tribal shaman came to the mission hospital and was shown a microscope through which you could actually see the living bacteria and what it did to human cells to cause the illness that had been plaguing his fellow villagers. The witch doctor left the meeting disgruntled and angry. Late that same night, the mission hospital was broken into by the witch doctor and his minions. They stole the microscope, took it to the village center, and smashed it to pieces. When he was confronted by the mission staff and asked why he did such a thing to such an expensive and valuable piece of medical equipment, the shaman smiled with a bit of a twinkle in his eye and said very softly, "Now there are no more bacteria." Just because we can't see or ignore the evidence does not render it non-existent. These pages, along with the writings of many others, simply stand as a microscope to point out the facts, whether scientific, religious, spiritual, archaeological, or any other method incorporated to establish the who's, what's, where's, and why's of the Nephilim, their progenitors, and the historical ramifications. Destroying or diminishing the vehicle of scripture or mythology cannot undo what exists. Genesis 6:4, for about the 10th time, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, descended to the daughters of human beings, Adam, and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Now, next section is divine offspring. When I was a young child attending Sunday school at the local church in our neighborhood, I was taught about the story of Noah and the ark. According to the storyboard felt cloth cutouts, Noah was a man who wore a robe and had a white beard. God had told him to build an enormous boat and to take 2 of every kind of animal on board, for there was going to be a great flood coming that would destroy the entire earth. The reason for the flood, we were taught, was that God had become angry with humans due to their sin and wickedness, and in his utter holiness, he needed to destroy every living thing and start all over, relaunching the human race with Noah and his sons and their wives, the only righteous people left on the earth, untainted by the wickedness of the rest of mankind. I heard this tale repeated many times as I was growing up, and saw many variations of illustrated children's books, toys, puppets, and even cartoons and movies depicting the tale. But never in all those tellings and retellings of the story did I once hear about the Nephilim. At least not until I was much older, attending Bible college and seminary. Hey there, Jeannie. I saw you pop in. David, nice to have you. Donna, good to see you. Barbara, nice to have you. It's nice meeting you down in Lincolnton, North Carolina. Let's see, let's move on. When thinking about the deliberate omission on the part of my various Sunday school teachers of one of the most important features of the story of Noah and the ark, I wondered if it was perhaps due to the fact that the entire story hinges on a sexual act, perhaps even rapes, perpetrated against human women by divine beings. These would certainly be things that most child-conscious church lay workers would hold as being too graphic for the minds of children. Yet those sexual events are vital to understanding the entire passage and the much deeper implications of why the flood took place. And you know, when you start looking at biblical tales, biblical stories, the lessons that we pull from them, when I was a youth pastor, I didn't edit anything. I didn't censor anything, because you will find that just about every story has some kind of sexual connotation, some kind of violent connotation, some kind of unsavory bit of thing that you wouldn't want to teach children. You look at the life of King David, as we talked about. He has sex with the captain of his army, has sex with his wife, and then has the captain put into the front of the lines and murdered. You see all these stories of Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. His brothers sell him into slavery because they're jealous of him. He ends up in Egypt as a slave. He gets falsely accused of rape, goes to prison, and all of this stuff happens to him before he's elevated. But one of the thing that sends him to prison is that the young, gorgeous wife of his master tries to seduce him, and he keeps turning her down. And he says, no, I cannot do this. Stop. We always had this picture in our heads from church as Sunday school kids. We were taught, and Joseph, with the power of God in him and imbued with the righteousness of the Holy Spirit, was able to turn her down. No, I shall not lay with you. You are my master's wife. And then she grabs hold of his cloak. He slips out of it and runs away. And then she cries rape. Doesn't sound too unlike modern politics. Anyway, moving on. I told the youth group when we were going through that account, I said, you know what? I said, I will bet you anything that the only reason Joseph ran was because Joseph knew if I stuck around, I'm going to shag this babe. And I can't do that. He had integrity, he had morals, he had ethics, but he's a guy and he's a human just like the rest of us. So how many of us, if we're tempted by something, are tempted by something that repulses us? That's, oh yeah, I would I would love to do that. It's so repulsive. I'm so tempted. No, I think he was tempted because what was tempting him was the absolute delicious opposite of repulsive. And so this is the way you look at the Bible stories. You start reading between the lines and saying, that's the way it is. And this is the same thing with this flood story. We weren't taught about certain things because it was sexual in nature. And it was very, very interesting. Hey, Audrey, nice to see you. It's okay. You're forgiven. So, just going to see if there's anything that looks good. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, indeed. I get that. Men can be ruthless, so can women. So I think it's a pretty even equality of the sexes there. All right, let's go back to Genesis 6, 1 through 8. I'm actually not, yeah, let's read it. I've read it before, but I'm taking it a step further here. When humans began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made humans on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found grace and favor in the eyes of the Lord. Now, I've wondered about this. If God, who could speak the universe into existence, God who could speak humans into existence, he could speak all life on the planet into existence, all in accordance with the biblical accounts. Why couldn't he, if he was mad about them, just speak them out of existence? Why does he have to give this demonstrable display of flooding the earth to wipe everything out, when he could have just spoken it all out of existence? That's something about God I don't understand. And there were things I said. I was going to write a book when I was very young. The questions I will ask God when I meet him. And of course, I never wrote that book, but just a bullet-pointed book. These are all the questions I have of God, if he exists. So, perhaps because he ain't the one. It's a good answer, Mark. Perhaps because he ain't the only one is another answer. So, there you go. Let's move on. Now, in the book of Jubilees, which many of you have probably never read from, half of you have never even heard of. Jubilees was one of those missing books that we talked about last night. Jubilees 5, 1 through 3, and it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose. And they bore unto them sons, and they were giants. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way. Alike men, and cattle, and beasts, and birds, and everything that walks on the earth, all of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other, and lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of all men was thus evil continuously. The entire account of the Nephilim, as we have already seen, was the preamble or the introduction, the preface to the Genesis account of the flood of Noah. And when reading it in its context, it renders a greater, deeper meaning to the understanding of the rest of the Genesis flood story. A meaning that has apparently been kept from most faithful church attendees and congregations and avoided by most ministers for centuries. It is one of those taboo topics that requires a much greater understanding of the scripture and why it was written, and therefore gets summarily skipped over or avoided for fear of opening up a can of worms that is either beyond the scholarship of the practitioners teaching it or outside the realm of what they want their congregation to understand. Nor does a traditional telling of the story of Noah and the ark and the destruction of the earth at the mercy of the great deluge sent by God fit comfortably into a picture of salvation and faith that most Christian teachers want to ascribe to the meaning of the passage. The reason for these omissions and ignoring of the meaning of the Nephilim in the passage becomes overtly clear when one takes a step back from the biblical scriptures and begins to understand the account of the flood of Noah and the Nephilim as part of a much greater story with far deeper implications. And even more so when it is found to be so incredibly comparable to many other myths and legends found in other cultures. In that light, the biblical account begins to take on the form of simply one version of an event that is mirrored in many other religious writings and what seems on the surface to be allegorical mythologies from nearly every culture of the ancient world. I'm going to take a sip of a drink here. June. Thanks for telling Audrey. I got myself a Captain Kirk toy. When you squeeze him, he says, "Beam me up, Scotty." He doesn't. This one doesn't. Sad to say. But I have a communicator that when you flip it open, it's got the sounds. Yeah, that's where Kirk speaks up. Now, the assembly of the sons of God. The trappings of heaven. Now, by the way, I hope the lighting is okay. I look and I can see my camera. Hope it's not too dark in here. I want it to be a little moodier and darker mystery every time I stare into their depths. The more I think back on my days growing up in the Christian church, the less I understand the superficialities of God and his angels that I learned while there. The concept of the assembly of the gods, or the divine council that was comprised of the lesser gods beneath the rule of Yahweh, goes all the way back to the pantheon of the Sumerians, once believed to be the world's most ancient civilization, but looking relatively young in comparison to new discoveries, newer at the time of this book, such as Göbekli Tepe, the circular temple complexes dating back some 8,000 years further than Sumerian civilization. The concept of the divine council was universally shared by the Semitic religious traditions of the ancient Near East that came after the Sumerians. The Sumerian god An, and his wife Ninhursag created or gave birth to the other gods in the Sumerian pantheon. This divine couple generally remained aloof from human affairs, residing beyond the sky and allowing their children, the lesser gods, to create the first man and woman, and all of humankind as a race of subservient beings. These lesser gods also became the patrons of the various city-states of Sumer. These lesser gods formed an assembly of gods, known as the Anunnaki, in the language of Sumer, which was presided over by Enlil, their god-king. Each of these lesser gods of the assembly represented or controlled major forces that affected the lives of their human servants. Enlil's wife, Ninlil, was also known as the Maiden, who ruled over human fertility. Inanna, the queen of heaven, was both the goddess of passion and of warfare. It was Enki, the god of wisdom, who was originally patron god of the city of Eridu. But later, the influence of his cult spread throughout Mesopotamia and to the Canaanites, Hittites, and Hurrians, who crafted the word platter that floats on the great abyss of the primeval waters. The world platter, sorry. There has been some controversy. Maybe you could say that's where some flat earthers have to go. The world platter that floats on the great abyss of primeval waters. Interesting. There's been some controversy over the interpretation of the Anunnaki in modern times. You can chalk this up to the spiritual drift of humanity, in that people are constantly seeking answers beyond the traditions they have held firm for so many hundreds and thousands of years. As I have said many times, man is a beast of discovery, wanting always to know more, experience the limits, and expand knowledge. After all, even in the book of Genesis, when Eve succumbed to the seductions of the serpent, wasn't it because she was curious and wanted to know and experience more? These things of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the divine council of gods, these are all the stuffs of new discovery, despite their ancient nature and the fact that we've known about them all along. And by the way, because I haven't mentioned it here, but we did mention it earlier, if you want to read about the council, the divine council, you can go to Psalm 82. Just read that and you'll get an idea of who they are. But we want to know more. So we read and we write books such as these to find ways to expand our knowledge. In those attempts to find the undiscovered country, we continually throw out new thoughts, new ideas, new theories. One of the latest developments on the grand scale of history, that is, has been the advent of the ancient astronaut, ancient alien twist on history and traditional religion. Now, here in 2019, we're so used to this stuff, it's become cliche. But even in 2011, as I was writing this book, it was still fairly new, despite the fact that von Daniken introduced the topic, Eric von Daniken, back in the late 60s, with his book, Chariots of the Gods. But it still was catching on. People were starting to get used to it. And it's pop cultural shows like Ancient Aliens, as good or bad as you think that show might be, that has really pushed that into the fore over the last decade. One could chalk this up to man's desire to gain knowledge. Others may consider it a turning away from the truth in order to find answers that do not require an adherence to the stricture of religion. Whichever it is, it's uncovered theories that challenge the nomenclature of religious history and even faith itself. One of the earliest pioneers in the ancient astronaut culture has been Eric von Daniken, who wrote his Chariots of the Gods series of books in the early 1970s. It was actually 1968 that he released Chariots of the Gods, if I'm not mistaken. David Mosier asks me, do you believe in astrotheology, Scotty? Yes and no, because I get what the term means, but I don't know exactly or precisely what you'd be talking about. Even though I could define that term, astrotheology, theology of the stars, theology of the heavens, theology of outer space, whatever it might be. I don't know if there's a strict theology you're talking about, and I'll check back with this later. Another is the late Zecharia Sitchin. In his near-religious writings of the 12th planet and subsequent books, his ideas surged the Anunnaki into popular culture in the ufological community and stirred up a simmering pot of home-brewed controversy on the topic. I grew up in the late 1970s, actually it was the late 60s and the 70s, and thoroughly enjoyed and became deeply intrigued by the writings of von Daniken. And I still enjoy him today in his many appearances on various documentaries revolving around the ancient alien theorist culture. Now, I have to say too, now that another 8 years has passed since I wrote this book, I've seen plenty of Eric von Daniken. So back then, not as much. Now, a lot. So his popularity increased even more so since the rise of the show Ancient Aliens. Let's see. Yet, although he's a pioneer who paved the way. Yet, although both of these respected, highly popular research authors, talking von Daniken and Sitchin, have made their great strides, forging the path for countless other theorists on the subject, elements of their work remain questionable, some revealing false findings and a severe lack of understanding and comprehension of the history and linguistics of the cultures they examine. Sitchin especially, while claiming to be a specialist in the ancient Sumerian language, makes exponential stretches in the definition of certain words that he uses to lay the foundation cornerstones of his ancient alien platform, completely mistranslating words and seeming not to comprehend the language that he purported to know so well. Zecharia Sitchin's hypotheses have never been accepted by scientists and academic peers who dismiss his work as pseudoscience and pseudo-history. Sitchin's work has been criticized for flawed methodology and mistranslations of ancient texts, as well as for incorrect astronomical and scientific claims. One of his foremost respected scholars in ancient languages is Michael S. Heiser. He has this to say of Sitchin. Michael Heiser, by the way, writes about the Nephilim. He's a theologian, but he's a historian. He's a linguist. And I used a lot of his work as foundations for some of the linguistic topics that I post in my books. Heiser had this to say about Zecharia Sitchin. As I noted in my open letter to Zecharia Sitchin, I have challenged him and other ancient astronaut researchers to produce one line of one cuneiform text that demonstrates his ideas about the Anunnaki are really in the Sumerian texts. I want to see one line of one text that says things like the Anunnaki inhabit a planet or inhabit Nibiru, or that the term Anunnaki means people of the fiery rockets, that sort of thing. These are the things that Sitchin got wrong. He mistranslated things. And by the way, and I don't know if I mentioned it in this book or in the Reptilians book, but so I'll mention it now and may recap it in the book. There is even an ancient lexicon that was written 5,000 to 6,000 years ago that takes all the existing languages of the day and compares them and defines them. And some of the words that Sitchin used, he moves forward as if there was no lexicon, as if there was no definition of these words. And he inscribes his own definition of things, ascribes. The unspeakable name of God. Yes, please do hit the like button. Thank you, Mark. Hit the like button, subscribe, and also hit the little bell so you get notifications. Getting back to the Divine Council, the pantheon of ancient Sumer was eventually borrowed by Sumer's northern neighbors, the Semitic peoples of Mesopotamia. And borrowed is an overtly simplistic term. It would be much better to say that the ancient religion evolved and spread into other civilizations that arose out of and around the Sumerian culture. Generally, they substituted Semitic names for the Sumerian gods. But the structure of the pantheon, including the distinction between the divine progenitors and the assembly of gods, was maintained in the Semitic religions. Although Semitic people typically substituted the name of their local chief god for that of the particular name of the god king who was one of the gods of the assembly. We see this in more recent history with the Christian church, when it banished the pagan religions. Say, think of pagan Germany, France in their prehistorical days almost, Dark Ages. Think of Great Britain. They banished the pagan religions of these places and took over their groves and their high places, building their cathedrals and even renaming pagan holidays with Christianized versions. However, and some of this, by the way, isn't news to you folks. You've heard some of this stuff before. It's just nice getting it all tied in a knot with this story. However, the Christianizing of pagan Europe resembles more of a conquest than an evolution, much like the pogroms instituted by Jehovah to wipe out all the non-believing inhabitants of the land of Canaan in order to institute the pure religion of Judaism. And although that may seem like an overgeneralized statement, all you need to do is go to the pages of the Old Testament to find instance upon instance played over and over again of religious-based genocide and xenocide. It is no wonder the early church felt the need to murder infidels. It is not difficult then to comprehend the heinous murder of someone such as Hypatia of Alexandria, considered the first notable female mathematician who also taught philosophy and astronomy, at the hands of murderous Christian mobs under the orders of their bishop, who later became Saint Cyril of Alexandria. It is also not hard to see how even the Crusades were then justified by the Christian hierarchy of the day, as it was so much the established pattern set forth in the pages of Old Testament scriptures. The spread of religion and religious practice either evolved or it was foisted and forced upon the new masses of commoners at the hands of a ruling monarch or body that needed to establish its power base over the people. See Chapter 7 for more on this, what we just read last night about Constantine and the things that he did. In Babylonian religion, the children of El, collectively known as the Elohim, were subordinate to their father El. These sons, and that's El, these sons of the god presided individually over the various stars and planets, as well as over their respective individual earthly estates, who could be seen in the night skies as the wandering star, the planet Jupiter today. In Canaanite culture, in-country, northern neighbors and political competitors to the Hebrew Israelites, Marduk was called simply Lord or Baal, while his true name, Hadu, or in some dialects, Hadad, was held secret and known only to his priests. Baal's chief rival for kingship among the gods was Yam, meaning sea. That's where you get Yam from. Last night we talked about the Red Sea and the bitter lakes to the north called the Yam Suf. Yam is the word for sea. Who also sometimes took the guise of a storm god. Think Zeus or Neptune. His personal name was Yah, or in some texts, Yahweh. For instance, in the Epic of Baal, El, speaking to Athirat about their son Yam, says, "The name of my son is Yah, O goddess." It is extremely interesting to note that the name Yam is intriguingly similar to the name of the Hebrew deity, Yahweh, the short form of which was Yah. The similarity of names is paralleled by a similarity of roles, because Baal was considered to be the chief rival of Yahweh by the Hebrews. Now, if you read the Old Testament, you look at the book of Kings and the succession of kings after the time of David and Solomon, there was constantly, with these kings, the fight between the prophet of Israel and the prophet of God and the prophets of Baal. And it was always go tear down the high places, the groves that were dedicated to Baal, tear down the Asherah poles. That was one of the great, do you remember, who was Golden Fleece Boy? Not Golden Fleece. The man who laid out the fleece. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. If you know it, let me know. But in the Bible, he kept laying out the fleece to get God. God told him to go do something. He's like, I'm not going to do that. Here, I'll just lay out the fleece. God, if there's dew on the fleece in the morning, but nowhere else, I'll go. So he gets up in the morning, there's dew on the fleece, but nowhere else. So then he goes, okay, now not Jason, that's the Argonauts, Audrey. That's the golden fleece. I'm thinking of the fleece in the Bible. And then there was the next morning, so he switches it around. Have dew everywhere else, but not on the fleece. And he lays out the fleece, and there's no dew on it the next morning. So it ends up, okay, I'll go and do the thing. And God commands him to go and tear down the Asherah poles, which a lot of these old standing stone monuments, they were just big penises. The shape of that, they were this phallic form. They would go tear them down. Audrey, from the Bible, LOL, she says, yeah, that fleece. I can't think of his name for some reason. It'll come to me when I least expect it. So it's extremely, let's see, I already read that. Baal was considered to be the chief rival of Yahweh by the Hebrews. Although this identification is not a certain one, the two are thought to have been the same deity by some scholars, or, at the very least, drawn from the same roots. In the same fashion as the Canaanites, the Hebrews regarded the true name of their tribal god, Yahweh, as far too sacred for common use, and they too usually called him simply Lord, the Hebrew Adonai, or sometimes Baal. Consider the scene of Moses before the burning bush. In the account of the book of Exodus, Moses asks God to tell him his name. Now, I don't know if I get into this. I got to share something with you. There was this whole thing in that burning bush scene where Moses leans in and God has already told him, tell the people that I sent you. And he leans in and he says, what was your name? God? Whom shall I say sent me? You can see that because there was this belief, and still exists to a certain extent, if you know the private name of a deity, you have power over it. And so he's saying, Moses is like, what did you say your name was? And God's like, it's none of your goddamn business what my name is. You tell them I am sent you, and so on. This is this unspeakable name of God section we're in. So Moses leans in and asks God, what's your name? Thinking he's pulling a fast one on over God. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what's his name, if you know the God of our fathers? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. In other translations, I will be what I will be. Que sera, sera. Or literally, I am that I am they speak of, is what that really meant. And because I am is what they called God, because they didn't know his name. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, when in capital letters, means Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. That was Exodus 3:13 through 15. Now I know I did not put this in this book because I wasn't aware of this at the time of writing this. And I either mentioned it here or I mentioned it in some other presentation I was doing very recently. But this whole thing about the phrase, I am that I am, Moses, which literally means in vernacular, I am that I am, they speak of. It's actually a Mesopotamian wordplay. And it was Dr. David Roll who did some research on that. And he presented, I asked him about this question, and he said, go read this. And he gave me the whole linguistic bit on it. And I'm not going to do that tonight, but I'll just tell you this. The phrase in the Bible in its original form, language, is a Mesopotamian wordplay that means I am that Enki they speak of. And when I heard that for the first time, I about dropped my shorts, my jaw down to my shorts, something like that. And I said, what did he say? It literally means I am that Enki they speak of. Now, what we don't really know is the connotation. Is God comparing himself or equating himself? Is he saying, I am Enki? Enki? I'm him. Or is he saying that Enki they speak of? It's really me. I am that Enki they speak of. And so we don't know exactly what it is, but we do know that Enki is the wordplay used for the name of God there. And that just about, when I first heard that and learned that, that is the importance, folks, of linguistics. That's why knowing what the language says, knowing not just the language, but knowing to whom it was written and what those people's understanding would have been of what was written, and understanding why it was written to them, gives an understanding of the words that you're reading. And when we read certain things in the English, they just lose their flavor. It's like, as we've mentioned so many times in this book, where Genesis says the sons of God came down, the sons of God this, the sons of God that. Well, in the Hebrew, it's the B'nai Ha-Elohim. That doesn't say sons of God in the original language. It says those who are the bequeathed of the God of many gods, or those who are of the God of many gods, because Elohim means God of many gods. And so it expands when you know the original language. And so you're getting to know this stuff can sometimes, as Jeff Dougherty says, unindoctrinate you from what you think you know, because there's so much more beneath the surface. A more literal reading, oh, wait a second, did I miss something? Yeah. Knowing the secret name of God was forbidden in Hebrew religion. And in a roundabout way, Moses here was asking God to reveal it to him, which according to tradition would have given Moses power over God. Again, Moses' ambition stands out, or at least the need to elevate himself as the Pharaoh God of Israel. Another prime example of this was when the prophet Elijah called on the secret name of God. How he obtained it, we don't know. But he did this to punish some young people who were taunting him and his position as the prophet of Israel. It says here in 2 Kings 2:23-25, he, Elisha, went up from there to Bethel. And while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." Okay, so there's a bunch of kids mocking him. And here, the prophet of the Almighty, the mighty power of God on earth, turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. The capital letters were used in this text, YHWH, Yahweh. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria. So here is the powerful prophet of the Lord. And in the Hebrew text, the capital letter, the power of Yahweh. And there's a bunch of kids mocking him, and he calls out 2 she-bears to maul the shit out of him. And I thought, that's pretty extreme. You ever been mocked by a child? Yeah, you go, I wish you were a little older so I could punch you in the mouth. But never have I called down animals to devour them. I thought that was pretty extreme. As a rabbit trail, yet vital to understanding all of these things, I found it very interesting to note that the prophet in this passage was able to call upon the name of the Lord and violently and maliciously kill 42 children who were mocking him, despite the fact that Bethel was known for mocking the prophets of God. This seems an extreme consequence for childish bullying. Perhaps this is the picture of the severe, uncontrollable consequence of calling on the secret name of God. For as it shows in the text, there was no other consequence for Elisha and his extreme actions. And as an anecdote to this story, keep in mind the third commandment of Moses. So number 3 of the 10 commandments. You shall not utter the name of Yahweh your God to misuse it. Yahweh will not leave unpunished the man who utters his name to misuse it. That's in Exodus 20. Now, get this. When we hear that third commandment, as I grew up in Sunday school and we heard that, thou shalt not use the name of the Lord your God in vain. For he who uses the name of the Lord his God in vain shall not go unpunished. Something like that. That's how we learn it in the English Bible. When you learn it in the Hebrew and you start parsing it, it really means this. No one shall use the private name of God for self-uplifting or vain purposes. He who does this shall not be held guiltless. And so in a real sense, what you have here is somebody who's used the name of the Lord, knows the private name of the Lord, used it, abused it for his own personal gain. And yet he was not held accountable so far as we know. Now, spot on, Mark. A more literal reading in the modern idiom would read something like, you shall not utter the secret name of God to misuse it for vain or selfish purposes. For Yahweh will not leave that person unpunished who does so. This commandment has little to do with the cussing and saying things like God damn it, which is what we were raising. You can't say God damn it, or you can't use the name of the Lord God in vain like that. You're violating the third commandment. It has more to do with the passage. It is pure and complete speculation, but perhaps the greatest punishment of all was living in the horrid aftermath of having utilized the holy to perform such an evil deed. As Israel expanded its territories, conquering and possessing the land throughout the region of Canaan, they killed and ousted the inhabitants who had entrenched themselves there during the 400 years of the Hebrews' Egyptian captivity. As a result, the displaced Canaanites became the traditional enemies of Israel, and still are today. When you think Palestine and Israel. But their deities seem to have the same identical roots, and were actually the same God, but in name only, as the form of worship differed between the two cultures. The parallels between Baal and Yahweh are quite detailed. For example, both peoples referred to him in his role as the god of the storms and war, by the euphemisms, the rider on the clouds, and the father to the fatherless. Psalm 68, 5-6 says, Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a parched land. Both are portrayed as overcoming their enemies, such as when Yam and his henchmen battle Litan, the fleecing serpent, the twisty serpent known as Leviathan in the Hebrew. Psalm 74 says, You did divide the sea by your strength. You break the heads of the dragons. Some translations say sea monsters, perhaps an allusion to the serpent, in the waters. Job 7:12 says, Am I a sea monster or a dragon? Again, an allusion to the serpent, that you must place me under guard? Job 26, By his power the sea grew calm. By his skill he crushed the great sea monster. Or Job 38:8, Or who enclosed the sea with doors, when bursting forth it went out from the womb. So it is more likely that, whatever the origin of his name, Yahweh took over the history of Baal in Hebrew folklore, and is best understood as the Hebrew equivalent of that Canaanite god, much like the Catholic Church did when they took over the pagan gods' places and erected their own cathedrals there, usurped their holidays, took their gods, and used them. Anecdotally, there's a famous confrontation between the Israelite prophet Elijah and the prophets of Baal, recorded in the Bible. And I've got a lengthy section of this here in the book. I actually go through a hell of a lot of scripture in this chapter establishing certain things. And it eats up a lot of page space. But let's hit some of these. It says, King Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, the troubler of Israel?" Now Elijah, remember, was the prophet of God to Israel. "And I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." The Baals, the B-A'-A-L-S. That's how you spell Baal, with the apostrophe in the middle. So you followed the Baals. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table," Jezebel the queen. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you weave between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces, put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." Then all the people said, What would you say is good? Or what you say is good?" Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given them and prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. By the way, interesting, if you ever go to Israel, you can stand on Mount Carmel at the place where this happened. There's not many places on the top of Mount Carmel. And so they're up on that mountain. And if you look at a map of Israel, if you were looking at it toward me, see the Mediterranean here, and you'd see the coastline of Israel. And then there's this little knob that sticks out and goes further down. That's Mount Carmel right there. Let's see. So now this is where Elijah starts mocking them. They danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he's a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought or busy traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted even louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." And they came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 sheaths of seeds. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water, and pour it on the offering and on the wood." Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a third time, he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell from heaven and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. And when all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah commanded them, Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. Now remember, there's 450 of them. So they seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered them there. That's 1 Kings 18:16 through 40. There's going to be quite a lot of people gathered on that mountain to detain 450 people and slaughter them. Hey, Suits. It is apparent that the Hebrews did not recognize the evolution of the religion of the Mesopotamian region. And it's clear that they did not worship Yahweh as being the same as the god of Baal, despite the name of Yahweh being originally sourced to a son of El, is attested by a document, KTU 1.1.4.14, from Ugarit, a Palestinian site occupied by the neighbors of Israel. The document translates as the name of the Son of God, Yahweh. Furthermore, this status as the foremost of the sons of El is commemorated in the Song of Moses, one of the oldest of the Hebrew scriptures found in Deuteronomy. When Elion, another name of El, apportioned the nations and he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the gods, the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. Yahweh's own portion was his people, Jacob, Israel, his allotted share. In Canaanite literature, Yahweh ruled as the king of the other children of El. In this role, he presided and judged whenever the assembly of the gods met in council. The preeminence of Yahweh over the other gods is repeatedly asserted in the Old Testament book of Psalms. In Psalm 86, we're told, There is none like you among the gods, O Yahweh. And Psalm 89 is even more specific in expressing that the gods are the sons of El, who met as the assembly of the gods, the divine council. So you wonder, when God in the commandment said, Thou shalt have no other God before me, he wasn't speaking euphemistically, he wasn't speaking figuratively. I think he was speaking literally. The heavens praise your wonders, O Yahweh, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the sons of God is like Yahweh? A God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and awesome above all that are around him. That's Psalm 89. So I got to tell you, folks, when I have asserted for years that the Old Testament doesn't teach monotheism. It teaches that there was one chief God, but it teaches that there were many gods. There was a pantheon of Hebrew gods, much like the Olympians and those guys. So angels are gods. Setting aside the theories of extraterrestrial interpretations that we touched on in earlier chapters, it is abundantly clear that the Genesis 6:1-8 passage is speaking of unique characters, the Watchers. Identifying these characters strictly as angels creates a problem in the text, which is supported by other biblical passages, such as Psalm 82, in which we have the mention of the Elohim in context of the divine council, the gathering of the plurality of gods. But the gods mentioned in Psalm in the psalm are not angels. So let's examine this psalm a little more closely, looking at its language and meaning. And this psalm goes like this: a psalm of Asaph. God, the Hebrew word Elohim, stands in the midst of the divine council, literally the council of El. Among the gods, the Elohim, same word as the God. He pronounces judgment. How long will you, plural, judge unjustly, showing favor to the wicked, Selah? Judge the wretched and the orphan, vindicate the lowly and the poor, rescue the wretched and the needy, save them from the hand of the wicked. They neither know nor understand, they go about in darkness, all the foundations of the earth totter. I said, you, plural, gods, Elohim. I said, you gods. He's talking plural, Elohim. Sons of the Most High, Bene Elion, another title for God. All of you, plural. But you, plural, shall die as men do, and fall like a man, O princes, shining ones of heaven. Arise, the command is singular. O God, and it's plural, Elohim. Judge, the command is singular, the earth. For you, singular, shall inherit all the nations. So you read that psalm, you get one idea until you start breaking it down in the Hebrew, and you find out. This is God, and remember I said in the Garden of Eden that the serpent character known as Nakash. Nakash is defined as the bringer of knowledge, the illuminator, the trickster character, the bringer of chaos. And he is also known as Elohim, as a bright shining, what did they call him? The bright shining princes of heaven. God stood in the midst of the gods, the Son of the Most High, a variation of the sons of God, as found in Genesis 6:4. In this council, the Bnei Elohim are called gods and also princes, and are told that they will collectively fall. One would have to manipulate the passage or simply overlook certain whole chunks of the Hebrew text in order to read around what it actually states. There is a multitude of gods. The first mention of Elohim in Psalm 82 must be translated as a singular, in that it is the subject of a singular verb. Elohim stands. Remember I said Elohim, the way you define Elohim as either being singular or plural, all depends on the context of the passage, the verbs contained in the passage. So Elohim stands. This is consistent with the Hebrew language. The second mention of Elohim in the psalm must be read as a plural, as the preposition in front of it, in the midst of, requires more than one. It is impossible to be in the midst of one person. In Psalm 82, God, Elohim, is presiding over the assembly or council of other gods, Elohim. This is where I spoke in a previous chapter of the word Elohim being both singular and plural, wholly dependent on the rest of the sentence structure and the context in which it is being used, such as saying, a deer stood in the midst of a herd of deer. The same word with both singular and plural contexts. And there you have it, folks. That is the most exciting grammatical lesson you've probably ever had. Science and grammar and sentence structure and history are amazing, fun, wildly... I can't think of another word. Wild things. Verse 6 of the psalm makes it very clear that the Elohim are the very same characters as the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6:4, and that he addresses them as the other Elohim and calls them the sons of the Most High, addressing them point blank, saying, You are gods, Elohim, all of you. An interesting observation has been made by Dr. Michael S. Heiser when he notes, and this is the same Heiser who previously in the chapter was taking Sitchin to task a bit for his linguistics. Heiser, he notes that the Elohim mentioned here are not angels, which comes from the Hebrew word malachim. Angel in Hebrew is malach. Plural for angel is like Nephilim. On the title, the I am is malachim. That's the plural, meaning messenger, which is an entirely different term than what occurs for the sons of God, which is Bnei Ha-Elohim. Other passages where the plurality of God, Ha-Elohim, appear are, among the gods there is none like you, O Yahweh, neither are there any works like your works. Psalm 86. For Yahweh is a great God and a great king above all gods. Psalm 95. Wherever you're hearing gods in the English here, it's Elohim. For Yahweh is great and deserving of exceedingly great praise. He is to be feared above all gods. Psalm 96. All who served images were put to shame. Those who boasted in mere idols, even the gods bowed down before him. Psalm 97. For you, O Yahweh, are most high above all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. 97 of Psalm. For I know that Yahweh is great and that our Lord is above all gods. Psalm 135. Oh, give thanks to the God of gods, for his mercy endures forever. The God of gods. Psalm 136. I will praise you with my whole heart. Before the gods will I sing praise to you. Psalm 138. Who is like you, O Yahweh, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? Exodus 13 or 15. Do you indeed decry what is right, O gods? Do you judge people fairly? Psalm 58. Some trains of more conservative theological thought insist that Psalm 82 is speaking of God addressing other members of the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But this cannot be at all accurate in light of the fact that not all members of the Trinity are sons. The Holy Spirit is not a son of God. And by the way, which I didn't mention here, the ancient Hebrews had no Trinity. They didn't recognize the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That is a Christian tradition. So, further in verses 2 through 5 of the Psalm, God is charging the other Elohim with corruption and condemning them for their corrupt rule of the earth. At the end of the Psalm, God is reclaiming the rule of the earth from the other Elohim. The implication being that they have done a horrible job of it, acting wickedly, and so they must be taken out of the picture. Again, according to Dr. Michael S. Heiser, these other Elohim were an impediment or a nuisance at best, a disappointment, certainly not indicative of the Holy Trinity, as defined by Christian theology. There are numerous other passages in the Bible that speak of this divine council and the Elohim as a plurality, as well as the sons of God, the Bnei Ha-Elohim. One of the most familiar passages where the sons of God appear is in the first 2 chapters of the book of Job, which is considered to be, chronologically speaking, the oldest book in the Bible, predating the formulation of Israel as a nation and the Jewish religion itself. Take note of another character who shows up in this passage. Listen to this. This is out of Job. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people on the earth. Or, I'm sorry, of the east. Of the east. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each on his day. And they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them, and would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." By the way, notice how early, this is way pre-Judaism. But the practice is still there of shedding the blood and the burnt offering. Death is required. Sacrifice is required. Thus Job did continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, came to present themselves before the Lord. And the Satan also, notice the article there before the name Satan. The Satan also came among them. The Lord said to the Satan, "Whence have you come?" And the Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then the Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not put a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the works of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land." And again in Job chapter 2 it says, "Again there was a day when the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, came to present themselves before the Lord. And the Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord." So it seems that Satan is a title, it's a descriptor. Satan meaning deceiver, deceitful. So the deceiver, the deceitful one. Because ancient Hebrew religion also did not have a devil. It didn't have the Satan as we define him. But they had the word, which meant deceiver. One could only imagine what exactly was going on in the courts of heaven when the divine council, the host of the Elohim, presented themselves before God, the singular Elohim that held rule over them. Although these verses, as well as other passages throughout Scripture, exist and have meaning and purpose, it tells of a very different picture of the gods of the Bible, and a much murkier purpose behind the things that they did. Suddenly, the picture of the mythological Zeus holding court with other Olympian gods, toying with the lives of humans while bartering with Hades, the god of the underworld, starts to look at once not so unfamiliar or far-fetched. Again, we see the great mythologies of the world start to emerge into a bigger, more mysterious story where the differing cast of characters blend and merge into one another. The members of the divine council, known as the Watchers, who descended to the earth on the slopes of Mount Hermon, did so with great determination to make a pact amongst themselves. They were charged with the responsibility of watching over humanity, the children of God's creation, but then left that responsibility behind when they looked down on humanity with desire, wanting to be one of them and experience the lustful, sensual, steamy, flesh-on-flesh, sweaty experience of sexual contact. They wanted to create a life that sprang forth from their own loins, experiencing what only the Creator himself had experienced. For this they were condemned, stripped of their godness, and reduced to a fleshy life that would suffer the consequence of physical death, a thing that they, apparently, would not have had to suffer in their heavenly state. But there is also the danger of ascribing too much non-malevolence to these beings. In a desire to make them seem more human, we can oftentimes imbue them with the attributes that they did not possess. In the Christian way of thinking, making something good that God has deemed evil can run the risk of heresy and blasphemous behavior, and apparently the Elohim, who stood in the midst of the Elohim, their divine council, had the superior power to condemn them for their actions. Yet, in a great speculation, it is curious to wonder how these lesser gods saw themselves. What had they thought about, and how they rationalized, or what they thought about, and how they rationalized a departure from their Creator. When mankind considers offending a holy God, we have nothing to register that against, save for words taught from the Scriptures and consequences that have religious mores grafted into them. These members of the divine council, who left their place in the courts of heaven and descended to the earth to cohabit with human women, seemingly understood full well what consequences their actions would produce. Yet they still did it. Was it because they didn't believe that God had the power to condemn and destroy them? Or was it that they simply didn't give a flying rat's ass? Because unlike human beings who have no visceral, tangible connection to the presence of God, save through faith alone, these were beings that had physical access, being gods themselves, and would experience the presence of the Most High God on a first-hand basis. Still, the Watchers chose to desert the divine council and make their way among the humans. Perhaps their biggest mistake was in believing that they were princes who could float untainted by their actions, above the consequences, and impose rule over the inferior children of Adam, much as Moses believed when he saw himself as the deliverer and the potential ruler of the Hebrews the day he murdered the Egyptian taskmaster. Now, let me take a momentary break here. I just want to see how much of this chapter we have left in accordance with our time. It is now 10:30, and we've got 20 pages of this chapter left, which I don't think we'll cover in a half an hour. And I do not want to conflict with rock. So we'll go as far as we can go, and hopefully not leave off at an awkward place. So let's just move on to the next section here. And that's how I met your mother. The Nephilim are the children of the sons of God, the offspring of the mixed blood of the Bene Ha-Elohim and the Benoth Adam. Benoth Adam is the daughters of men. The daughters of men. But these offspring, according to Scripture, were anything but normal kids. There was no father-son stroll down the lane, fishing poles on the shoulders, whistling a happy tune, and skipping stones into the Euphrates River. We were told in the text that the offspring of the sexual relation between the sons of God and the human women was like an experiment gone very wrong. The accepted view in academia is that the Nephilim are the offspring of angels, but that may be only part of the story, at least according to the text as rendered in the 1611 King James translation of the Bible, where the word Nephilim has been translated as giants. As mentioned previously in the book, the generally accepted view of the word Nephilim is that it is derived from the Hebrew word nephal. The word im, or the im ending, signifying plurality. The most commonly accepted definitions for the word nephal are to fall, as if to the ground, to fall as if in battle, to be cast down, to desert a location, to fail. As Craig Hines suggests in his book, Gateway of the Gods, these definitions are most likely were in reference to fallen angel. Hang on, I had clunky sentence. These definitions are most likely in reference to fallen angels originally. But he goes on to ask which of the meanings most readily applies to the Nephilim, and does it refer to the angelic parents or the hybrid offspring? If we are to take the first definition of to fall as if to the ground, it would seem that this could apply to angels who fell from a state of grace to an evil fallen one, an active motion moving from one place to another. But there are much better, more succinct words to describe this act, such as yarad, which means to come or go down, to descend. And the im would have been added in some form to denote the plural aspect of the word yaradim, or some such word. Then there is the second definition, to fall as if in battle. This definition denotes death, but we're told that these sons of God and their offspring were very much alive. They were living, breathing, thinking, lusting, and having sexual intercourse and reproducing. Doesn't sound very dead to me, unless perhaps later scribes were making reference to them at a much later date, viewing them as the dead warriors who had already been destroyed in the waters of the great deluge. That's a stretch, but it's a possibility. The third definition, to be cast down, seems to be a perfect fit if it were ascribing a fallen state to the Watchers and their offspring. They would have been seen as being cast down from the heaven as a consequence of the rebellion against God. Yet were this the only definition, it would exclude the many accounts of other cultures experiencing these beings as good, well-meaning teachers and beings of beneficent intent. Remember, the offspring of the Watchers were not all considered to be evil, but are written about as such in Scripture as a collective. The fourth definition speaks to desertion, a moving from one location to another with deliberate abandonment. In a real sense, this is what the Watchers did when they descended to the steeps of Mount Hermon and deliberately made a pact to willingly leave their godly estate on the divine council and dwell among the humans, one of the purposes of which was to experience the fathering of children with human women. The fifth definition is one of failure, which could easily be manipulated to fit the context, in that the Watchers obviously failed to do their duty and fulfill their responsibility, which is, in part, the reason they are condemned in Psalm 82. You can also find this supported by the text in the book of Jubilees, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in the second week of the 10th Jubilee, Mahalalel took unto him to wife Dinah, the daughter of Barkael, the daughter of his father's brother. So it's his cousin. It's my cousin. It's my cousin Barkael. And she bare him a son in the 3rd week, in the 6th year, and he called his name Jared. For in his days the angels of the Lord descended on the earth, those who are named the Watchers, and they should instruct the children of men, and that they should do judgment and uprightness on the earth. So, now we've got another long passage from Jubilees in here. I just want to see what we've got going here, since it's 10:34. And I don't want to step on Rocky's show toes. So let's do this. To break at a good place, let's go another page and a half here up to the next section. And we'll call it a night on this chapter, and we'll pick up and conclude the chapter tomorrow. Now here's the text from Jubilees 5, 1 through 10. And it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, and that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants, and lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, alike men and cattle and beasts and birds, and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other, and lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of all men was thus evil continually. And God looked upon the earth, and beheld it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted its orders, and all that were upon the earth had wrought all manner of evil before his eyes. And he said that he would destroy man and all flesh upon the face of the earth, which he had created. But Noah found grace before the eyes of the Lord. And against the angels whom he had sent upon the earth, he was exceedingly wroth, and he gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion. And he bade us to bind them in the depths of the earth. And behold, they are bound in the midst of them, and are kept separate. And against their sons went forth a command from before his face, that they should be smitten with the sword. And he removed from under heaven. And he said, My spirit shall not always abide on man, for they are flesh, and their days shall be 120 years. And he sent his sword into their midst, that each should slay his neighbor. And they began to slay each other until they all fell by the sword, and were destroyed from the earth. And their fathers were witnesses of their destruction. And after this they were bound in the depths of the earth forever, until the day of the great condemnation, when the judgment is executed on all those who have corrupted their ways and their works before the Lord. Can you see the similarity that shines through in all of these texts, even from the books that were completely eradicated from Scripture under the councils invoked by the Emperor Constantine? This speaks to the fact that not all of these non-canonical scriptures were indeed rightfully eradicated from the Bible. There are inherent problems, however, with the word Nephilim, and Heiser goes through great strides to demonstrate the differences between the Hebrew and the Aramaic, where a word yod, Hebrew vowel, can take the definition of the word in a completely different direction. Heiser ends up defining the word Nephilim as meaning those who were fallen, expressly meaning those who fell were fallen. That's how he defines it. Linguist. Those who fell were fallen. However, though I have great respect for the linguistic work of Heiser, I would more align myself with the observations of Hines, who expresses a philosophy that seems inherent to the context of the Genesis 6 passage, wherein the Nephilim came across as, for all practical purposes, rather neutral. They are not defined by the evil of some fallen state of their parental lineage, but are rather set up in the Genesis passage by Moses as being heroes of old and men of renown. They were obviously not all inherently evil in nature, and a study of these beings in the literature and scriptural writings of other cultures demonstrate that many of them were not considered to be malevolent. The Watchers may have descended to the earth in a desire to cohabitate with human women, a thing they knew had grave consequences for them in the divine council, but they came down to experience life as human beings and to procreate. Some of them may have had evil intent, as we'll see, but others obviously bore no malicious, devilish intent. They taught humans the forbidden knowledges of such dastardly things as cosmetics and mirrors, and herbology and medicine. But some also took advantage of the humans by teaching the arts of making weapons, sorcery, and waging war. It was their hybrid offspring who, it is said in the passages of Enoch, wreaked havoc and brought destruction to mankind. The Watchers' inability to control what they had procreated seems to be the source of the corruption. And the sin of the Watchers themselves was the act of deserting their posts and fraternizing on the most intimate of levels with those whom they were appointed to watch over. The consequences were widespread and resulted in divine judgment. Teen Angel, I was just thinking something very similar, David. Cue the music. Then again, you also have the viewpoint of Derek Kinder's work, in which he says, the craving of demons for a body, evident in the Gospels, offers at least some parallel to this hunger for sexual experience. Again, for clarity and reference, the passage is written in 1 Enoch. It happened after the sons of men, and then I'm not going to read that because it's the same passage again, and it just talks about how when they all came down, I know I'm corrupting the reading, but it's the same passage we've read before out of 1 Enoch. Ends with, that mountain therefore was called Armon, because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual execrations. Hines sums it up best. There is good and bad in everything, and it is through the actions of an individual, even an angel, that determines their nature. It is my sincere belief that, in accordance with the language and the context surrounding the various appearances of the word Nephilim, they were not inherently evil in nature, and they are best described as the descendants of a race of beings who abandoned or left their place in the heavenly realms and the courts of the divine council and descended to the earth in violation of the rules established by God. In Jude 6 and 7 it says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he is reserved in everlasting chains, under darkness, under the judgment of the great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in the like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." Once again, we also see in this passage the reassertion of the prohibition against certain forms of sexual activity. As we saw with the serpent character in the Garden of Eden story, we see again in the account of the Watchers. Everything seemed to revolve around encoded sexual activity in its adulterous or fornication forms. Fornication. I think I couldn't find a good adverb or adjective there. I just think of that as I reread this. I remember that in my head. Trying to word that sentence. Couldn't get around encoded sexual activity in its adulterous or fornicacious forms. Position of consequential judgment, imposed after these rules are violated. In the case of the breeding of the hybrid race of Nephilim, God was grieved that he ever made man and set about a great natural catastrophe to wipe them all out. Mankind, Nephilim, and every living creature on the planet, according to the Genesis and Enochian accounts, save for one man and his family, and pairs of every known animal in creation that could not survive in an aquatic habitat. I wonder why he didn't want to kill all the fish, too. The next section is perfect in his generations, but since it is now 10:45, we're going to stop there for tonight. And we're going to pick it up tomorrow. And I want to stop there only because I want to respect Rocky's space and his show. And if you listen to his show, I want to give you a chance to recuperate a bit from this reading before you go into listening to something else that's very good. I think he's got Robert Bauer on again tonight, if I'm not mistaken. That's Yin Yang if you see him in the room. So, Casper, thank you. And everybody, thank you for listening. I do want to go back just a little bit and see if there's anything that anybody brought up we should talk about. Folks, if you were in here and you wanted to talk about anything in particular and I didn't address it, restate it now. And you'll pick up the beginning of the read later. That's good, Audrey. Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of meat in this chapter, and we still have about 18 pages of this chapter left. So we'll hit those tomorrow. If you've got anything you want to discuss in the final minutes, go ahead and type it right here in the room or in the chat room, and we'll hit it real quick. Let's see. I'm just going to see if there's anything in here we need to address that we couldn't or that we missed. Most of these could probably be handled in context, and I should probably in the future get somebody to help point these out. Do a favor for me. Those of you who are listening now, when you listen in and you want to ask a question, type your question in all capital letters, just so it hits my eye a little easier while I'm reading, and I can stop and address that question. So, hot toddy break, somebody says. The Energizer Bunny ain't got squat on Scott. Well, thank you, Mark. Coconut and rice. Not sure what that is. I had coconut in a salad tonight. Let's see. Pastor and Swords and June was talking about. And that's how I met your mother. Yeah, that was one of my little fun isms in the book. So I hope you're enjoying the readings, folk. I don't see anything to really... have you heard of the Enuma Elish? Yes, I have. And we even referenced it in some parts of the book here. Let's see. I need to listening, but momming. I get that, Michelle. Toddler was up until 4 a.m. last night, a new record high. A new record. You know what? My kids fight it every night. And so just before coming in here, my wife was fighting with the kids, getting them in bed. I was trying to help, and then I said, oh, man, I got 4 minutes till I'm supposed to be over there in front of my computer. So anyway, there you go. Done for tonight. Got 12 minutes or so until Rocky comes on. Go listen to his show over at Rocky Stucci. And thanks for being here. It really means a lot to me that you show up, that you listen, that you enjoy it, and that you share it. So like the video down below. That helps me. Also, go up and subscribe if you're not subscribed. Hit the little bell so you get notifications. And so thank you, everyone. And PK, thank you. Good to see you here, too. Mary, good to see you. Jeannie, I told you I'm going to do that the rest of my life, Jeannie. Suze, Michelle, Brian Parker, good to see you. Thank you for sharing it to your playlist. And as far as that goes, I'm done. So thanks for being here again. We'll see you tomorrow night, where we'll hit the rest of Chapter 8. And that's probably all we'll do tomorrow night. And then we'll move on to Chapter 9 after that, the next night. So have a good night. Go listen to Rocky, and see you here tomorrow. And by the way, I want to tell you, go to my page, scottallenroberts.com. You can see all my junk there, the things I do. If you're a little ad for myself, if you need logo design, if you need book cover design, book interior design, if you need writing done, photography, graphic design, illustration of kids' books or grown-up books, frankly. I've done some of those as well. That's what I do. That's what I've done for 35 years of my life. So that's what I do for a living. If you need me for any of that, you can get a hold of me over there. And also, we've got Son of a Patriot over on Etsy. Go look it up, see the shirts and stuff we do for Rocky's Meatball Army and all the other stuff that I do. So there's my own little personal ads. Thanks. And I'll tell you all once again, because some of you might not have been here, my publisher called me today and wants me to write the follow-up. They asked me if I would write a book on the Book of Enoch and the whole thing about Enoch. And I said, absolutely I will. So I've got to work up something for them. That's going to be the official follow-up to the Nephilim, which I wrote 8 years ago. So there's some good news for the day. So again, thanks for being here. I'm going to let you go now for real this time. It's the long goodbye. So I'll talk to you soon. Have a good night.